So this is going to be our test read aloud. Okay. Source 1 for question 1 is the preamble. Okay. So I'm not going to read the preamble to you guys, but y'all are familiar with the preamble. Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to organize stuff. Okay. So here's the preamble. Starts with we the people. Okay. Question 1 says, using source 1, which statement best describes why the founding fathers started the preamble to the United States Constitution with we the people? A, the government will treat all the people equally and fairly. B, the government will guarantee peace for all the people of the country. C, the government and the Constitution were created by the people and for the people of the United States. D, the government will take care of the well-being of the people. Okay. Number 2 asks about source 2. So legislative branch. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit, guys. Legislative branch creates the laws. The executive branch enforces the law. The judicial branch interprets laws. As part of the newly created Constitution of the United States, the founding fathers created 3 branches of government known as the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. So question 2 says, using source 2, what was the main reason for the founding fathers to create 3 separate branches of government? A, it allowed each branch to make laws for the country. B, the 3 branches made it impossible for one person or branch to have all the power. C, it created a system of checks and balances. D, to make sure that the rights of all citizens are not ignored or disallowed. Anytime I go too fast, just stop your video, okay? Source 3 is the Bill of Rights. Okay, I know it says Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, Article, you see 6 and 7. It's actually all 10. It says articles, but each one of those articles actually means amendment. Amendment 1, Amendment 2, Amendment 3, all the way through Amendment 10. Okay, so using source 3, which is the Bill of Rights, which statement explains why a Bill of Rights was included into the Constitution of the United States? A, create laws that gives the federal government power over the nation. B, allowed citizens of the United States the right to vote. C, limit the federal government's power over the nation. Or D, protect the rights of every citizen in the United States. Okay. Source 4. The 15th Amendment. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. The 19th Amendment. Oops, let me back up. I'm sorry. I did this on yesterday's video too. We're still on source 3, guys. Psych! Source 3, the Bill of Rights. Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, Article 4, meaning Amendment 1, Amendment 2, Amendment 3, Amendment 4, Amendment 6, Amendment 7, Amendment 8. Amendment 1 says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, prohibiting the free exercise thereof. nothing to inhibit freedom of speech or the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble. Amendment 2, a well-regulated militia, the right of the people to keep and bear arms. Amendment 3, no soldier shall be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner. Amendment 4, the right of the people to be secure in their persons against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. Amendment 5, no person shall be held without answer for capital. In other words, these are rights of the accused. Okay, so no double jeopardy, no self-incrimination. This is, I plead the fifth. Article 6 is going to be right to a speedy trial. Okay, Article 7, that's right to a trial by jury. Okay, Article 8, no excessive bail, no cruel and unusual punishment. Article 9 is rights, other rights go to people, and Article 10, other rights go to the states. Okay, so based on source 3, what are some rights that are protected by the Constitution? Select 2 that apply. A, must pay taxes to support the government. B, freedom of religion. C, cannot be searched without a warrant. D, soldiers can stay in the homes of U.S. citizens. Or E, a person may be trialed only by a judge. Choose 2. Remember, your hint is up on the board. There's a hint on this question. I have 2 pictures of my son up on the board. He's in uniform. That's your hint. Okay. All right. What are 2 rights protected by the Constitution? We're talking about in the Bill of Rights, in those first 10 amendments. Okay. Now we go to source 4, since your dear teacher had skipped to source 4 a minute ago. Sorry about that, guys. Source 4, 15th Amendment. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. 19th Amendment. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex, meaning gender. Okay. Number 5. Based on source 4, what is an amendment to the Constitution? It's an addition to the Constitution that may change a current law or add new laws to the Constitution. B, it creates new responsibilities for citizens of the United States. C, it allows citizens to voice their grievances to the government. Or D, it creates checks and balances for all the branches of the government. Number 6, based on source 4, what was the main purpose of enacting the 19th Amendment into law? A, to allow African Americans the right to vote. B, to declare poll taxes and literacy tests illegal. C, to give voting rights to all citizens. Or D, to allow women the right to vote. I certainly hope no girl gets this wrong. Is that a good enough hint for you guys? All right, sit-ins at Woolworth's, 1960. Canal Street, talking about New Orleans, was the city's main shopping area in the 1960s. However, Jim Crow law allowed lunch counters to refuse service to African Americans, which made up 40% of New Orleans' population. On September 9th, 1960, white and black members of the New Orleans chapter of the Congress of Racial Equality defied those segregation laws at Woolworth's lunch counter. The students were arrested for holding the sit-in at the Canal Street location. Based on source 1, how did African Americans try to solve the community issue of segregation in New Orleans? A, by voting. B, by obeying local laws. C, by protesting. Or D, by serving on a jury? Okay, here's a map. In these states, segregation was required by Jim Crow laws. Okay, in these states, here it's in black, segregation was required. These states in black. These states that are striped, there's 3, segregation was allowed, meaning some of the schools were segregated according to a person's skin color, some of the schools were not. These states that are white, there was no segregation, meaning everybody attended schools together, no matter their skin color. Okay. Now, in class, when we're going over the test on Thursday, we read a little bit of this article, and it's very frustrating what's written in this article, and very angering. And you guys heard that I changed some of the words when I was reading it because I won't say those words. Okay, they're hateful words in the article. There were words that were commonly said in the 50s, unfortunately. But that's not what the question's about to ask you about. It's asking you about these states that are shaded in black. Okay? Based on source 2, which region of the United States would be most impacted by the end of segregation in schools? A, North, B, West, C, East, or D, South? If it helps you to think about it this way, look at the map. Where was segregation required? Think about if segregation, and actually thankfully when segregation ended. Where segregation had previously been was where things would be the most changed, right? So look at what region had segregation. That's the region that would have the most change, right? So what region do you see with segregation? Okay. Now look at your answer choices. Okay, we're still using source 2. And remember, I've given you guys some clues about this, telling you about Adrian and Tamia's experiences, okay? So this question would be useful for the 1960s as well as 2021. Using source 2, how can a good citizen contribute to the democracy of the United States? Select 2 that apply. A, being informed about the issue of segregation. B, becoming a leader. C, being persistent in informing people about the issues. D, advocate for everyone's rights. E, pursue life, liberty, and happiness. Select 2 that apply. Two things that a good citizen could do to contribute to democracy, fairness in our country. Okay? In other words, if you see someone getting picked on, based on race. What could a person do? Okay. Select 2. Oops. So many pages to this test. It's a big test. Source 3, Civil Rights Act of 1964. Under the Civil Rights Act of 1964, segregation on the grounds of race, religion, or national origin was banned at all places of public accommodation, including courthouses, parks, restaurants, theaters, sports arenas, and hotels. No longer could African Americans and other minorities be denied service simply based on the color of their skin. So number 10, based on source 3, what impact did the Civil Rights Act of 1964 have on the United States? A, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 allowed all citizens of the United States the right to vote. B, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 banned segregation of citizens based on race, religion, or origin of birth. C, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 permitted store owners to only serve customers based on race, religion, or country of birth. Or D, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 increased the number of protests against segregation in the United States. Okay, source 4, March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. All right, as I told my first block on Thursday when we went over this picture was taken look real quick, guys. March 28th. This was the same March on Washington, August 1963, as this picture. Okay. I don't know if it appears to be the same day. So I'm guessing it was minutes or hours before we see Martin Luther King in the other picture. Okay, so this is on the way to the Washington Mall. Okay, this is actually marching to where we see him in the other picture. Okay, and we see lots of people walking. Okay, we see their signs. We march for jobs for all now. IUE for full employment. Before we'll all be a slave, we'll be buried in our grave. UAW says end segregated rules in public schools. We march for jobs for all now. Okay, so different signs that people were taking while they're walking. Okay, on August 28th, 1963, an interracial, we see down here, interracial means involving different races, assembly of more than 200,000 people gathered peaceably in the shadow of the Lincoln Memorial to demand equal justice for all citizens under the law. The crowd was uplifted by the emotional strength and prophetic quality of the address given by Martin Luther King Jr. that came to be known as the I Have a Dream speech, in which he emphasized his faith that all men someday would be brothers. Based on source 4, what was the purpose of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom? Was it A, to protest for equal voting rights for African Americans? Was it B, to protest for equal justice under the law for African Americans? Was it C, to protest against segregation on buses based on race? Or was it D, to protest for African Americans to have freedom of speech? Let me pull back up this article to help you. What was the purpose? Sorry, guys. I just wrapped up a day of teaching my 3 blocks of students, and I'm tired. Benadryl's kicking in. Okay, I'm trying to give you a big old hint with my pencil. Okay, look at your answer choices. Okay, also based on source 4, number 12. What impact did the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom have on the Civil Rights era? African Americans could not be discriminated against based on race. B, segregation ended in the United States. C, it led to the famous I Have a Dream speech. Or D, African Americans were able to work at any job. Think about the keynote speaker. What did he say? Okay, moving on, my friends. Source 1, establishing a government. The delegates debated long and hard over the contents of the Constitution. Some of them wanted a document that gave much power to the federal government. Others wanted to protect the rights of the states and called for a weak central government. Delegates from large states claimed their states should have greater representation in Congress than the small states. But small state delegates demanded equal representation in Congress. The delegates finally reached agreement on a new constitution on September 17, 1787. The Constitution provided for a 2-house legislature, a House of Representatives and a Senate. Representation in the House was based on population in order to satisfy the large states. All states received equal representation in the Senate, which pleased the small states. 13 asks, which statement best describes why the Founding Fathers created a legislature with a House of Representatives and a Senate as part of a new government as seen in source 1? A, each state had equal and fair representation in the federal government. B, larger states gained more power in the federal government. C, smaller states gained more power in the federal government. D, they created a system of checks and balances. Source 2, colonies and the empire. Before the Revolution, Americans benefited from being part of the British Empire. England's command of the seas gave American merchants access to markets in Europe, the Mediterranean, and the Caribbean. Chief American exports, salted fish, rice, wheat and grain, and tobacco, were carried throughout the world by American ships. England's growing industries made manufactured goods available to American consumers. While the American Revolution freed American merchants from British restrictions, it also denied Americans British protection and made it difficult for American traders to trade with Europe. Before the Revolution, 75% of American exports went to England, Ireland, and the West Indies. After the Revolution, Britain and her colonies would buy only 10% of America's exports. Based on source 2, declaring independence from Britain had what effect on the colonies? A. The colonies had to begin to manufacture goods. B. British taxes increased the cost of goods. C. It became very difficult to trade goods with Europe. Or D. American ships had less goods to trade. Here's a picture in color. We can see a loyalist man, his wife and their baby walking, along with others on a trail. Someone with a horse. Appears to be a native. Loyalists leaving the American colonies. The atmosphere after the Revolution was unruly. Many people, whether they were actively loyalist or not, were persecuted by the Patriots. Individuals were harassed, physically assaulted, homes were looted, and property was destroyed or stolen. This treatment was given not only those who were actively loyalist, but to others who did not seem patriot enough. Many of these people fled America and went to Canada. Based on source 3, why were loyalists leaving the colonies? A. They were being persecuted by other citizens that had different beliefs. B. They did not agree with the direction the United States was going. C. They wanted to make a new life for themselves. Or D. There were no farms left to grow crops. Here's a picture of Adam Smith. Smith argued for free trade with no restrictions in the form of tariffs. A tariff is a tax on a traded good. He saw in the American colonies merchants who had sought out markets and wealth not because of government policy, but because they were self-interested traders. If government would lift trade barriers, Smith predicted, merchants would seek out the best markets. In addition, Smith insisted, gold was only a measure of wealth, not the source of wealth. Real wealth came from agriculture and trade in agricultural goods. Using source 4, which of the following best describes why Adam Smith believed that all trade should be free of barriers? A. It would allow the growth and trade of agriculture. B. Gold would become the measure of wealth. C. The British had placed taxes or tariffs on the colony, which had a negative effect on the economy. Or D. Taxes and tariffs were used to pay for protection from other colonies. Other countries. Number 17, based on all the sources and your knowledge of social studies, describe 2 effects that the American Revolution had on the United States of America. And guys, with this, you can give me bullet points or you can give me complete sentences. 2 effects. That's all I need. Do not write a paragraph. I repeat, do not write a paragraph. I know you don't have time to write this fast, so you can hit stop on your video. All right, number 18. Which of the following occurred as a result of the 14th Amendment? A, by the way, you know, there's a poster of the amendments right above where I'm sitting right now, right above my printer. Just saying. Which of the following occurred as a result of the 14th Amendment? A, African Americans were freed from slavery. B, newly free men and women moved west to claim land. C, African American men voted in the 1872 presidential election. Or D, freed African American slaves were given citizenship. Okay, you see the list of 4 things: Stamp Act, Boston Massacre, Boston Tea Party, and the Intolerable Acts. All the events listed above led to which of the following? The Civil Rights Movement, the Civil War, the Bill of Rights, or the American Revolution? Which thing did those 4 events lead to? I mean, what did they lead directly to? I don't mean like, 30 years later something happened. I mean, pretty darn soon this thing happened. Okay, there's a map of Seneca Falls. What do you know? So Wednesday, we talked about something occurring in Seneca Falls. What state was Seneca Falls located in? And what occurred at Seneca Falls? Ladies, here's a big old hint. Which of the following events occurred at the location shown on the map, Seneca Falls? A, a march for the civil rights of African Americans. B, a meeting discussing voting rights for women. C, the United States Congress met to create the Constitution. Or D, the location where the Declaration of Independence was written. Which of those things occurred? Okay, use the chart and your knowledge of social studies to answer the question. Congress passes a bill. The president vetoes the bill. Congress overrides the presidential veto. Which principle of the U.S. is illustrated in the sequence shown above? Judicial review, checks and balances, federalism, or rights of citizens? Okay, which of those things? (22) Use the timeline and your knowledge of social studies to answer the question. What was the primary reason for the British to pass these acts, Sugar Act, Stamp Act, Townshend Acts? To increase growth of industries in the colonies, to recover the costs of the French and Indian War, to encourage trade between foreign countries and the colonies, or to create new colonies. Remember, we talked about the British trying to raise money. How are they raising money? $23. How did the above impact African Americans? Poll taxes, literacy tests, and grandfather clauses. Now, we've not discussed grandfather clauses before. So if we just think about poll taxes and literacy tests, how did those impact African Americans? It made it difficult for African Americans to vote. It allowed African Americans to vote. It made it difficult for African Americans to own land, or it allowed African Americans to own land. We've already discussed about poll taxes and literacy tests before. Sorry, my mouse bleeding. 24. Which of the following was a grievance to King George III that was written in the Declaration of Independence? A. Colonists born in America were prohibited from holding elected office. B. Colonists were not eligible to become officers in the British Army. C. Colonists were forced to quarter troops in their homes. Or D. Colonists were required to serve a year in their colony's army. And is that a big enough hint for you? You're welcome. Okay, for this last question, because I don't have a copy of it printed, and my printer here doesn't work. I have to go to my other test to show you guys. Waiting for the Elmo to come in. All right, 25. Who is the leader of the executive branch? A, Speaker of the House. B, Supreme Court Judge. C, Vice President. Or D, President. Remember I told you executive? We think of the leader of a company, the leader would be a CEO, Chief Executive Officer, who's the CEO of our country. That's a big old hint. Okay, our last question, 26. Colonists don't have a voice in Parliament, so England shouldn't tax colonies. In other words, no taxation without representation. Is that a patriot quote or is that a loyalist quote? Covered up the other two choices because we've never used British Army quotes and we've never used colonist quotes. So I'm telling you, it's either a patriot quote or it's a loyalist quote. Is no taxation without representation a patriot statement or is that a loyalist statement? Okay, so it's either B or D. All right, friends, that is it. Bye.